Good morning. You're watching Daybreak, and our SMS feedback number is 22422. Our hashtag is Daybreak at Citizen TV Kenya. Send in your comments. We will forward them to our panelists in studio. Deputy President William Ruto has launched his manifesto ahead of the August 9th polls. Dubbed the plan, Ruto anchored his blueprint on economic renewal, saying Kenya's economic challenges require immediate attention and that one of his priorities as president would be to revive the economy in a post-COVID era. The manifesto highlighted interventions aimed at lowering the cost of living, protection of micro, small and medium enterprises, affordable healthcare and education reforms, among other issues. We unpack Ruto's agenda this morning with my guests in studio, starting from my extreme left there, Dunstan Omari. He is an advocate. Many thanks for joining us this morning. We're also joined by Gloria Oroba. She is a public policy analyst, as well as Mark Bichache, who is a communication strategist. I'll start on this end with you, Mark. What was your initial feeling when you listened to the manifesto, or when you went through it, listening through it? The ordinary citizen who is a voter and a taxpayer anticipates these promises every election year. So for you, what stood out in this manifesto?
You know, what stood out for me is how, when you look at it, it's a continuation of the Jubilee agenda. It is talking about housing, which is part of the Big Four. It's talking about MSMEs, which are being supported by increasing the funds. Reminds you of Wezo Fund, reminds you of the Youth Fund, reminds you of the Women Enterprise Fund, which is, again, a continuation of the same. You look at how he said he's going to collect revenue, upgrade that to 3 trillion by digitizing how revenue is collected. Again, what KRA is doing. So I think he is piggybacking off of what he considers to be good planning on the part of the Big Four agenda, including universal healthcare, making NHIF part mandatory for everybody. That is part of the universal healthcare pillar that Uhuru Kenyatta started, which is a very clever strategy on the part of William Ruto, because the best way to build is to continue what someone else has already built, which is a stroke of genius, because then you're able to meet the timelines that you're talking about. So for me, this is a very big continuation of the Big Four agenda. But the question now you've got to ask yourself is, what then has happened to that hustler moment? Yes, there's a fund called the Hustler Fund, but that fund is by and large the same as Wezo Fund, the same as the Women Enterprise Fund, the same as the Youth Fund. Why? Because it requires you to be in a chama, requires you to do the same things that right now. The only difference is the amount of money that he's talking about has been increased. So those are the things that stood out for me. For me, I think this is Big Four rearranged.
Gloria, Mark is drawing parallels with the Big Four agenda. What was your initial feeling when you listened to the DP read out his manifesto?
First of all, I'd like to say that this manifesto is not a manifesto that was drafted as the Big Four agenda was drafted in a boardroom with a few experts, with the intention of basically thinking that these are the issues and this is how we're going to solve them. This manifesto was actually a culmination of all the economic forums that we've had in the different counties. And so, you know, when you speak to people in different regions, right now we know that the issue is the economy. And so the manifesto is actually reacting and responding to the needs of the people. Whether or not it's a continuation of the Big Four agenda, I will say something is we have the same problems. And you cannot, you can't spin problems, you know? You can't spin the solutions. The solution of having our youth getting employment or economic empowerment is actually to create jobs. How do you create jobs? You need to start up businesses. So when I hear someone saying it's a continuation of the Big Four agenda, maybe that is their analysis, that's okay. The Big Four agenda was actually a really good agenda. And we know, had the president actually executed it to the last, or tried to, you know, bring it to fruition, then probably our problems would have been different. But we know what happened. There was a handshake. We went into constitutional reforms and amendments. And, you know, the Big Four agenda actually was not completed. And I would say this. When you talk about issues such as the Hustler Fund, it is not the same fund as Wezo Fund and Youth Fund. And I want to I'm actually speaking authoritatively because I'm speaking from an informed place. I was part of this let me say, gathering all the needs and the thoughts from all the economic forums. I went to quite a few, actually. And the Hustler Fund is a a response to why Uwezo Fund and Youth Fund has not been working for people in the grassroots. First of all, you don't need to be in a group for you to access the Hustler Fund. You do not need to be in a circle or a group of 10 or 15 or whatever. You can go as an individual who has a business and actually apply and get it. Number two, you're not going to need security. We are not asking for land. We are not asking for guarantors. We are not asking for and those are things that Youth Fund and Uwezo Fund, particularly Youth Fund, is asking for. And another thing, the Hustler Fund is not going to be dished out like, you know, how they are giving money in Uwezo Fund. We are going to have a basic training for those who are intending to participate in business skills. They're going to have a basic business skills training that will ensure that whatever business they start will be sustainable and will be able to create jobs. So there's a huge difference of the Hustler Fund. And most importantly, it's going to be on the ward level. So this is a fund that you'll be able to access from the grassroots, not having to come to a constituency or to come to on the ward level, meaning that we are devolving the funds, or what you'll say capital, to create jobs on a ward level.
We'll be getting into how to finance this Big Five agenda. To you, Dunstan, what stands out in this document?
When you look at the document, thank you, viewers, for allowing us to be on Citizen Live this time. When you look at this thing, one, it is a reaction towards President Uhuru Kenyatta, a personal reaction that I'm out of Jubilee, I'm out of government, then I want to be that different person. Two, when you look at the economic narrative that the Hustler movement has really made everybody believe, you don't see it here. You see it on rallies, but when you look at it critically, you find that it's not there. Three, when you look at the question of the funding of this mega manifesto, you find out that the funding is not provided for. The argument here is that they will reorganize the funds that are already there, remove them from where they think there's a wastage of resources that have been put there, and put them into the bottoms-up approach. But the modalities of that reorganization seems not to be there. Reorganization can be by reducing and having a lean government. But when you look at this thing, it's a monster that is going to expand government. They are creating positions to put independence of the Attorney General's office. I don't know how, whether they are going to create a constitutional amendment to allow creation of the Attorney General's office as a constitutional office, because as it is now, legally, it has all the powers that it has. They are also talking about the judiciary.
Yes, and we'll get into, you know, the entrenchment of the independence of the judiciary and what have you. But as we get into unpacking this document, the manifesto gives us details on, you know, how this will be delivered. But in terms of the fact that the country is dealing with a 3.2 trillion budget that is currently available, we're looking at a huge debt overhang. Where is this money going to come from? And I think that is what Kenyans are asking. There's a huge debt overhang. So I want to get your individual thoughts on this. Where will the money to execute or fund these proposals come from? I think let's begin with Dunstan as we get the thoughts of the other panelists. Yeah,
the question of, one, the foreign debt, the question of the cost of living, the question of how Kenyans are living is an element of where will we get this money so that we close that financial gap. It is not provided for. Neither is it provided in Azimio manifesto, because that is the reality that until we get a way to get local resources to fund our projects, because when Kenya Kwanza is saying they are going to reduce on infrastructure, mega projects, and go to small projects like agriculture and others. What will be the long-term effect? Because unless we continuously put more resources into infrastructure, that is the only element that will produce the cash that we have that will turn later into the pockets. In the Azimio manifesto, they really put it very clear that they will inject more money in the question of infrastructure. William Ruto is saying that there is a lot of money that is wasted. He's trying to say that gaps in the anti-corruption crusade, because everybody is identifying that there is money. The leak starts from non-fighting corruption. But when you look at here, the instruments that they have put to make sure that corruption is not there is only reorganization and giving autonomy of institutions that do investigative and decision-making of the judiciary. So in my own view, the question of where this money is coming from has also failed. Gloria might be telling us where they will get that money from in simple terms, so that my villager in Nyamira can understand where is this money going to come. I've not seen any instrument in terms of the KRA empowerment. I've not seen any instrument here. They are saying they will either raise taxes. I've not seen any, because everything here, 95% will come from KRA. The question about bilateral agreements and foreign funding has not been addressed, as the question Musali has always been telling us that we have overborrowed. Kenya is being auctioned because we have overborrowed. What are the instruments in this manifesto that clearly tells us that we are now going to stop borrowing?
Right. And I think what Dunstan is asking is the how and the mechanics. Because, yes, you say that we will be funding this project with this much, we will be funding this project with this much. But are you spreading, or is Kenya Kwanza spreading itself too thin as regards the ambitious plans outlined in this manifesto? Mark, Gloria.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Just because the highlights in the papers have not really documented the details, the first thing is that you need to understand when we are saying that we are going to deal with the economy with the bottom-up economic approach, it also means that we are going to expand the tax collection bracket. It means that there are industries out there that are not paying taxes, rightfully so, because they're not receiving any services from government. Look at the boda industry, look at the mamamboga industry, look at even the juakali, the taxes that is being collected is minimal because we have not really organized that space. So number one, we are going to expand the tax collection bracket, meaning that we'll have more industries, we'll have more businesses that are actually remitting taxes. On top of that, there's a thing that actually Dunstan might have missed, is that there are a lot of corporate organizations that seem to be aligned in the and this is now where the corruption starts, even when it comes to the tax collection. There are a lot of corporate businesses that are actually not paying taxes because they seem to enjoy what you would call an upper hand because they're friends of people in high places. That is something that we have talked about, we are going to deal with, and that also is a form of income in terms of tax collection. Then when you talk about where else the money will come from, when we're talking about increase of productivity, increase of for instance, just that the produce in agriculture, right now we are not even able to sustain what we need in terms of just our produce like rice and maize and whatever. First, we need to go to a place where we can increase that produce such that we are able to sustain what we need locally, and then actually push it further so that we can export. So that's also a form of income. Then when you talk about resources, we just had a report, I think 3 weeks ago, of how we have such wastage of resources in terms of government agencies and government departments, and they even had figures on how, and we're talking about, it looks like small things, you know, tea and transport and what, but actually it piles up to a huge loss in terms of resources. If we're able to also, you know, minimize that and have government run efficiently, that's also a form of income in terms of where you're going to get that money. But most importantly, yesterday my party leader William Ruto talked about, let's stop digging the hole. When you find yourself in the hole, the first thing you need to do is you need to stop digging the hole. What do you mean by that? Right now, we are borrowing because there's this... I don't know whether it is an obsession of pushing for infrastructure that's not really thought about, you know, end to end and the impact of it in the socioeconomic world that we are in now. But stop the borrowing first. Stop the borrowing, because we've realized that we are in debt. We've realized we cannot sustain the debt. We've realized that even if we are pushing to borrow so that we can put that money in infrastructure, the infrastructure is not really well thought of so that we can actually have a socioeconomic impact. He talked about the SGR, the thought process of why we took the SGR to Naivasha, how it has not been, implemented to the sense that it actually is bringing in money, or it's, it has an economic value. So the first thing is stop digging the hole. Because we found ourselves in the hole, we need to stop digging the hole and figure out how we're going to get out of there. So slow down and actually at one point stop with that borrowing of the funding that we are pushing, so that we can push on, put up infrastructure. So, I mean, to ask where is the money coming from is a good question, but everybody who's coming up with a manifesto will tell you they're going to put, they have funding priorities, like we have funding priorities. And that's a question that I think Kenya Kwanza has been able to answer repeatedly.
Has Kenya Kwanza answered this?
In a proper way.
Yes. Okay.
And we even, one of the things that I also want to talk about is, remember when we talked about the 6,000 that our competitors are actually offering? And we had a breakdown from our party leader on the return on investment on their 6,000, which was zero, and on the Hustler Fund, which is the 50 billion that we are giving. And there was a breakdown on how it's going to actually bring back and push back money into the economy. So I think we've answered that in detail.
Has it been answered in detail, Mark? Does this nation have enough resources to spur economic growth, economic empowerment? Can we survive without borrowing as an economy?
Let's be honest to Kenyans and stop waxing lyrical about certain issues. Number one, if you're going to fund anything in this country, you're not going to do it without fighting corruption. That is first and foremost. Why do I say so? Because it's the biggest place you can get a big saving is where you fight corruption and find those billions of shillings that usually trickle out of our budget. That's the first place. Now, Azimio has a very firm plan on how that is done, both in its manifesto and in the recent interview that both Martha and Raila gave. Now, the question really in the fight against corruption, you've got to ask yourself who are the personalities in play, because if I like football and I tell you I'm going to cut football from my TV watching, I'll be lying to you. Similarly, people who have a penchant for corruption are not going to be able to fight corruption. This is just a fact. In fact, if you look at a deputy president who is publicly saying that the first item on his agenda when he gets into power, if he does get into power, is to make sure that his funds which have been frozen are released so that he can buy a new house. That should tell you the kind of character of people we're talking about. So you need to look at the character of the people and ask yourself, are they able to actually fight corruption? Second issue is taxes. And why am I talking about taxes? Because in answer to this question, William Ruto was very categorical. He said that he wants to increase the collection of taxes from 1.8 trillion where it sits today to 3.2 trillion. That's what he said. And he said that he needs to digitize KRA, and by digitizing KRA, he'll be able to do so. So one of the biggest problems with that statement is that KRA is already being digitized. Already they're introducing new ETR machines. So again, this is part of his genius to promise what is already being done. But at the end of the day, let us underscore one thing. If you're taxing more, then you're paying Kenyans more. And that's where the trade-off is. Are you going to tax more, or are you going to borrow more? That is always the question. So his direction where he's going, he's saying that he's going to tax more. And I like... That
is not true.
But how
He's
else?
not going to tax more. There are industries that are not even taxed, Gloria, because they are not receiving any service.
Gloria, let's allow Mark to respond to the question.
That's not true, though.
Mark, carry on, Mark.
So that we can finish as well. Yeah. You understand? And I like the fact that even Gloria here, who's arguing, has just said that corporates need to pay taxes. And I like that, because I remember UDA was at some point defending Keroche industry for not paying taxes for a long time. So I'm glad they've woken woken up to the reality that corporates actually need to pay tax, and they should start with Tabitha Karanja. She pays taxes. Thirdly, let me just correct a little something that was said, that SGR is not in profitability. SGR,
and there are many others, of course, members. So let's not.
I was just
but in terms of this statement, Dunstan, in terms of weaponization, and I'll let you finish.
Okay.
If the bone of contention truly is corruption, the statement here that was outlined in this manifesto in terms of weaponization and politicization of the war against corruption, and the DP speaking very strongly about the fact that corruption really continues to be the thorn in the flesh of development in this country, whether it is in terms of funding, whether it is in terms of budgets. So Mark here saying that nothing will be achieved as long as corruption is not adequately dealt with. What did you read into this statement when the DP, quote unquote, said weaponization and politicization of the war against corruption remains a thorn in the flesh of where we are headed as this nation?
One thing that is very, very clear from the day William Ruto was given the mandate at Kasarani to carry the flag of UDA, and in his manifesto, is the war against investigative agencies. He is very, very clear that he has used the term, they are weaponized. That is the true nature of every investigative agency, because it must have the police coercive powers that they arrest and drag to court. They cannot be anything. And if you are talking of the fight against corruption, it is one, asset recovery, getting people checking their money that they cannot explain what it is, recover it. That is the weapon that William Ruto is talking about. Mm-hmm. Two, if you are talking about corruption being an issue, it's arresting people and arraigning them to power. There cannot be any way William Ruto will get the fight of corruption without enforcing the force in those organizations. Mm-hmm. He's trying to tell us that he's going to make them, like universities, to talk to people, like churches, so that they can tell people, please don't engage in corruption. So that tells you clearly they are not determined at all, to push the agenda against corruption. Two, when you look at the question of weaponization of these entities, you get a feeling that my good sister is telling you that we have some companies that don't pay. Mm-hmm. The first introduction with Lillian, I told you, is that it is a witch hunt against the family of the president, His Excellency the President Uhuru Kenyatta, and a few others who they feel that we need to grab this. Inside these, you read...
A witch hunt, but one that has not, of course, been verbalized, or one that has not been...
Yeah, by body and by conduct and by implication, they are telling you there are people who do... There are companies, specific companies. That's why I said this manifesto is a reaction towards the fallout between Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. Two, when you also see they are talking about they will get money. The only avenue to get money is through corruption. The fight against corruption, because now we can't borrow more, we can't raise the taxes anymore, we can only make sure any coin collected is handled properly. The only way to make that be realized is to put more resources on the instruments called the DCI, the EACC.
What about the introduction of foreign elements as well to tackle corruption, which is another thing that came out as the DP was reading out his manifesto? Just the fact that if the current organs and the existing organs that we have in the country are not adequate, that then it would be essential to introduce foreign elements to try and curb the election. I mean, the corruption that we see in the country.
There is no way we are now going back to say we are unable to run our country. There is no way. We had a judiciary that was completely foreign. we made it local. We have investigative agencies that were foreign. We made them local. Is William Ruto saying he does not have confidence with the professionals, with the Kenyans to do their job? That is a serious question. They are saying they want to give Kenyans jobs, the hustlers jobs. But they are telling you, for this angle, we are getting foreigners to do this job. This can't be a manifesto then for Kenyans if we are still thinking of getting personnel to do this job. Number 3, why are we saying organs of government for the fight against corruption are imported? Is it because the majority within this group have cases against, the government has cases against them in court? True. Is that a solution so that we have the law that was there formerly where we say the state can come and file an ole prosecute, terminate all these cases? I think what William Ruto is trying to tell Kenyans is that upon them being sworn in, they will stop the prosecution of every corruption case, because to them, these cases have been taken to court, not because they deserve to be in court, but because they are politically instigated, and that's what they're saying. The arms of government have been weaponized. If we go that line, then we make corruption not a serious offense in this country, then we deal with corruption the way we deal with assault, the way we deal with other matters. And that is why, Gloria, we put you to task. Explain to us, what is it that these arms of government have not done or have done contrary? Because all of them arrest, take you to court. The person who decides whether you are guilty or not guilty, it's not them. Unless Kenya Kwanza does not understand how justice operates. It is the judiciary that convicts. If we are saying we are stopping from bringing people to the judiciary to decide, then we'll have completely failed on the fight against corruption.
And I'll get Gloria's response just before we take a break. Very quickly, Mark, you seem to feel that this manifesto did not adequately look into corruption, and I think that is the direction you are heading before before Dunstan came in. In terms of looking into corruption and in terms of issues around corruption that you feel have not been adequately dealt with, and therefore that's sort of leaving Kenya Kwanza in an awkward position, like you were saying before. What then would be the way forward? And when we peg this on this statement, that weaponization and politicization of the war against corruption, which seemingly implies that the organs we have in place are not working.
You know, the deputy president said yesterday that the police commander is actually His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, which was a very unfortunate statement, because that, by dint of what he just said, makes him the deputy commissioner of police, because he is the deputy president. So making such statements has created a doubt in the institutions that exist. And that really is a dangerous thing, because it is saying that before this moment, every person who's been arrested, whether it is for robbery, for murder, or for whatever, has been arrested because the president willed it, not because the police were doing their jobs. Now, the danger of having such a statement and then encapsulating that in a manifesto is that you then turn your government into a witch hunt government. It is a government that is looking to settle scores. And the problem is it causes jitters, especially now when you take that conversation and put it down into statements that, for example, were shared yesterday, that we are going to favor MSMEs over big business. And that's not really where you want this country to go. This is not a socialist state where the state is going to capture big business and then break it apart to give it to MSMEs. MSMEs do not suffer because big businesses exist. In fact, The question that has been asked over and over again is that, one, do we need more big businesses, more industry, more manufacturing, as opposed to having MSMEs? And I'll tell you why this argument is clear. Number one, not everyone is an entrepreneur. 10% of a population is entrepreneurial, only 10%. The other 90% needs jobs. And where do you get those jobs? You get those jobs in industries, you get those jobs in manufacturing. And that's where there's a big difference between the Azimio Manifesto and the Kenya Kwanza Manifesto. The Azimio Manifesto is about, let's do this. Let's create jobs through industry. MSMEs will only benefit 10% of Kenyans who are entrepreneurial. And then what happens to the rest of the 90%? And this question is very, very important, because at the end of the day, and let me finish with this. When you talk about the fight against corruption and how it affects Mwananchi, if you've been promised 6,000 shillings by Azimio and they're able to deliver it to you in full, then that is corruption being fought, because we know donations have been eaten before. But when you're talking about going the same route where only entrepreneurs will benefit in this hustler fund, you're not really helping people. When you say that there's no return on investment on helping people, there's no return on investment on putting food on the table for the poor and the needy, so they should starve because they have no return on investment. Surely we cannot say that helping poor people who are in need has no return on investment. I think
this was also in line with boosting the livelihood of 17 million people who are employed or underemployed. And I think what came out in this manifesto is that we are a consuming nation, but we are not producing. And therefore, Gloria, your response to both gentlemen as they really poke holes into Kenya Kwanza's almost populist approach, because I think that is what. I
think Lillian, going forward, I need more time, because you realize I'm sitting here alone and I'm battling this too. But any day I can wipe the floor with them. To correct you, in Europe and the US, 75% of production actually comes from MSMEs. So let's not try and water down the impact of MSMEs. But I want to talk on the issue of corruption and some of the things that I've had. When we are talking about ensuring that all corporate organizations actually pay the taxes they need to pay, we know for a fact, and may I dare say, that there are some institutions and some business transactions that have actually been exempted of taxes. And just to put out one example, NCBA, the merger of NCBA actually got exempted of a lot of taxes, and up till today, okay, Amtata, I think, your fellow went to court and actually asked why. So when he brings up the issue of Keroche, we were, in fact, I was on set saying, if you can exempt billions from the merger of that bank NCBA, why can't you sit down with Kereche and see? So basically, we're trying to say that it has to be fair. It has to be an equal playground for all. And we are not, it feels like a witch hunt for certain people, because for certain people, they have actually, for a long time, been exempted of taxes because of who they know in government. And that's what we are saying we are going to deal with. Now, when someone talks about corruption and does not even want to understand that, indeed, our bottom-up economic approach will deal with corruption, you ask me how. Recently, we've seen how our port was actually sold. Our port was sold. We call it state capture. We are actually talking about individuals in this government who went to transact business and sold off the port. And the one thing that my party leader actually said is we are going to take back those functions, because that is it's a resource and it's a form of income. And if you ask the people at the coast, they're suffering because they don't understand they have the port here, but there's no economic impact on them. So when we talk about looking at the people who are at the front, look at their characters, see if they actually have intent, we actually call for the same, because the people who have sold the port are the same people.
But we do know that Okori Atani also clarified
Lillian,
and outlined exactly why this move was made and who it was essentially going to benefit.
Will come and tell you, nilikuibia kwa sababu niliona utumiangi your handbag. So does it make it right? It's not right. So Ukuri Yatani can come out and say all he wants to do it, but the thing is, they auctioned our port. And those people who auctioned our port are the same people who Mark Bichache is sitting here trying to actually say, these are the white people who are Wakokama Pamba, they have no corruption cases. They have sold, that before you know it, if you give them 5 years, Lillian, we might end up being back in colonial era because we don't own anything. So the issue of corruption is an issue we have really beat and said, corruption doesn't happen down there at the grassroots. Corruption happens in the boardrooms, in the jets, in the high-level places and who are in those places. We know exactly who are in those places. So our economic approach and how we intend to actually, by the way, I keep on telling people, ours is not a manifesto, it's a plan. And you know, a plan, the difference between a manifesto is this vision that you have, and ours is a plan that even if today I give to Mark Bichache and he goes to State House, he can actually implement it because it has a step-by-step, and including dealing with corruptions, with the corruption issues. Dunstan, you talked about the fact that are you trying to say that we should not take the cases to judiciary? What exactly? No, we understand that all these institutions are actually run with resources. And with
we
money.
are going, I'll end it there, Gloria,
no,
when we come back.
No, let me just finalize, because I feel like you need to give me this time. Okay. It's strengthening institutions, which is what William Ruto is saying he's going to do, means also that you give them their fund and it is independent. Because, like he said yesterday, there is no way judiciary will be able to actually push through convictions if their budget is actually being controlled by the executive. So at the end of the day, what we are talking about is strengthening the institutions, judiciary, police force, and all the other, actors within that space, so that when someone is brought in, it will not be that I can make a phone call to the president and then the president can say, Kateni here, Nini, then judiciary comes and says, we don't have money for this and that. So you have to strengthen the institutions, which is our plan to do so. And that actually begins with ensuring that their finances and their funding is independent, both in the police service, in the judiciary, and all the actors within that space. Yes.
And as we take a break, when we come back, we'll be looking at Kenya Kwanza's statement that it will not mutilate the constitution and what that translates to. You will remember yesterday that the UDA presidential candidate seemingly criticized his Azimio counterpart for not implementing sections of the constitution. For instance, as we had mentioned with Dunstan Omari, our panelist here, he said he will appoint all judges that have been appointed by the JSC, nominated by the JSC to the Court of Appeal in 7 days. So these are among issues that we'll be talking about when we come back from the break. Remember, our SMS feedback number is 22422. Our hashtag is Daybreak at Citizen TV Kenya. Keep your comments coming. We'll forward them to our panelists in studio. We're back in just a bit.